Καλησπέρα σας, ξανά. Ξεκινάμε το τέταρτο μέρος της ημερίδας μας, τη στρογγυλή τράπεζα, η οποία έχει ως θέμα το πώς δημιουργούμε ένα ασφαλές περιβάλλον για τους φορολογουμένους, την προστασία των φορολογουμένων και την επίλυση των διαφορών. Πριν δώσω το λόγο στην κυρία Ρένα Γυρινάκη, την αναπληρώτρια συνήγορο του φορολογουμένου των ΗΠΑ, θα ήθελα απλώς να πω δύο λόγια για αυτά που ο πολύ καλός φίλος, ο συνήγορος του πολίτη, ο κύριος Ανδρέας Ποτάκης, ανέφερε πριν. Παρουσίασε με πολύ γλαφυρότητα και πολύ ακρίβεια, αν θέλετε, μια κατάσταση η οποία δυστυχώς είναι η πραγματικότητα της καθημερινότητάς μας στις υπηρεσίες μας. Ως ανεξάρτητη αρχή δεν φοβόμαστε αυτή την εικόνα. Χρειαζόμαστε να τη βλέπουμε. Χρειάζομαι και εγώ προσωπικά ως διοικητής, αλλά και οι επιτελείς των κεντρικών υπηρεσιών να τη βλέπουν. Πολλά πράγματα δεν φτάνουν σε εμάς και η ειλικρίνεια και η ευθύτητα είναι το καλύτερο όπλο στην αντιμετώπιση των προβλημάτων. Να πω ότι αρκετά από αυτά που ανέφερε στην πράξη είτε έχουν λυθεί σήμερα, είτε είναι σε πορεία επίλυσης. Και είναι πολύ σημαντικό ότι και οι δυο μας συμφωνήσαμε να έχουμε τακτικές επικοινωνίες, προκειμένου ό,τι δεν λύνεται σε κατώτερο επίπεδο, να μπορούμε να το λύνουμε εμείς. Δυστυχώς, μία από τις πολύ σοβαρές αιτίες αυτών των προβλημάτων είναι η κουλτούρα της γραφειοκρατίας που υπάρχει σε όλο το δημόσιο και αναπόδραστα και σε εμάς. Και η γραφειοκρατία δυστυχώς είναι ένα μόρφωμα που έχει την ικανότητα της αυτοαναπαραγωγής. Αυτό έχω παρατηρήσει τώρα 15 μήνες στην θέση αυτή. Προσπαθούμε να τα αντιμετωπίσουμε τα προβλήματα. Αυτό πάντως να ξέρετε ότι είναι και το δικό μας το προφίλ πια. Δεν είναι το προφίλ του κρύβουμε τα προβλήματα κάτω από το χαλί. Είναι η επιθυμία μας να τα αναδεικνύουμε τα προβλήματα, να τα βλέπουμε και να μπορούμε να τα επιλύουμε, και γι' αυτό δίνουμε και πολύ μεγάλη βαρύτητα στην εκπαίδευση των υπαλλήλων μας, η οποία θα φέρει και την αλλαγή της κουλτούρας σε αυτούς. Θα καταλάβουν δηλαδή και εκείνοι ότι δεν πρέπει να είναι απέναντι από τον άνθρωπο που τους μιλά, να προσπαθούν να του βρούνε λύση, γιατί η λύση είναι που βοηθάει και συνολικά την οικονομία, χτίζει την εμπιστοσύνη, η εμπιστοσύνη φέρνει την επένδυση, είτε μικρή, είτε μεγαλύτερη, είτε πιο μεγάλη, και όλα αυτά τα προσπαθούμε πολύ πολύ συστηματικά. Να τον ευχαριστήσω για την ειλικρίνειά του και είμαστε εδώ και στο επόμενο διάστημα να συνεργαστούμε από κοινού για να τα βελτιώσουμε. Switching to English now. Thank you. Okay. You speak Greek, though, I think. Or at least you understand, right?
Χωριάτικα.
Well, the speech of the Greek ombudsman actually raises the issue: what is a safe environment for the taxpayer and for their protection? I will give the floor to Rena Girinakis, Deputy Advocate, Taxpayers Advocate of the IRS.
And to the Ombudsman, we just found out that we're both from, our families are from Corinth, so we have a little Peloponnese spirit in us. I think, starting out, it's critical to talk about how we create a safe environment for taxpayers. How do we create a place where taxpayers can go to seek protection of their fundamental rights and assistance in resolving their cases? The key to creating this type of environment is to approach taxpayers from a place of understanding. And this is one thing that we're trying to do right now within our organization. It's very important that the training is critical, but within the Taxpayer Advocate Service, we have placed significant emphasis on that. It comes down to a few things: talking with the taxpayer, understanding their individual situations, talking with employees to give them the skills and support to do their job, and in turn give the taxpayers the knowledge and skills so that they can comply with the tax laws. we're trying to correct the taxpayer behavior as well. So instead of the taxpayer sitting back and going, okay, I'm going to try a little bit of Greek here, instead of the taxpayer sitting back and saying malon leve, instead it's Athena ke hirakini, right?
Right.
All right, so we need taxpayers to participate in the tax system. And the way to get taxpayers to participate in the tax system is to educate them and be engaged with them. Customer service involves more than just having a website and processing returns. Customer service means really talking and engaging with taxpayers and understanding their individual situation. It's critical to basic taxpayer rights. Customer service underlies the right to challenge the IRS's position to be heard. Taxpayers have the right to raise objections, to provide documentation, and expect the IRS will consider the information before making a decision. And I think that's a very key component. Listening to the advocate, we are very fortunate in the Taxpayer Advocate Service that we exist, number one, for taxpayers, and that they have the opportunity to come to us prior to the agency taking actions against those individuals. They have that opportunity to come to us before the bank accounts are levied. Good customer service means that the taxpayer is being heard, that the IRS is actually considering what the taxpayer has said as part of the decision-making policy and process. Taxpayers have the right to expect IRS actions will comply with the law. Taxpayers have the right to a fair and just tax system. So it comes down to, from our perspective, understanding taxpayer-specific circumstances and applying them to their specific case, and giving them a venue to receive assistance if the normal process fails. In times of budget constraints, customer service is often the first thing to get cut. This decision is short-sighted. While reducing customer service may save money in the short term, it leads to downstream cost. Downstream cost in compliance, in taxpayer service, in collecting revenue. IRS's failure, for example, to answer phone calls. In 2015, they answered, their level of service was 37%. That means all those other calls did not get answered, and taxpayers were calling to help them comply with the tax laws. They sat on the phone for 22.9 minutes on an average. Are you inspired to comply when you're sitting on a phone and you want to make a payment or you want to figure out how to file your return properly? Correspondence exams versus face-to-face exams. You know, people are much better off when they have a face-to-face exam and they can interact with the auditor and provide their documentation, and the auditor in turn helps them through the audit process. The IRS, as another example, has recently eliminated several of the walk-in services. A perfect example of how it goes wrong, a taxpayer walks into the office to make a payment, and the IRS says, I'm sorry, we can't accept your payment because you didn't have an appointment. Where's the logic? Well, there is no logic. If you're concerned about people who are not complying, customer service is especially important during a time when you're trying to bring taxpayers into the system. Taxpayers are already distrustful of the system, and they expect to be treated like tax cheats. Instead of focusing on the opportunity to help them become compliant, suspending judgment, instead of viewing them as tax cheats, the tax agency would have a greater chance of achieving compliance. The agency, of course, needs to ensure that those who are actively evading, as opposed to those who are just going along to pay their taxes. An emphasis on customer service does not eliminate or constrain a single enforcement power that the agency has. It does ensure that the power is used legitimately and wisely and appropriately. And that approach does, in the long run, promote compliance. I'm going to skip around because Nina took some of my points, and I'd like to talk about the Taxpayer Advocate Service. We're an independent organization within the IRS. When a taxpayer has a problem, they come to the Taxpayer Advocate Service. We have 1,800 employees. We have a local taxpayer advocate in every state, and they have case advocates. When a taxpayer comes into the system, they get one case advocate, and that case advocate works with them throughout the entire process in coordinating and facilitating the discussion between the IRS. Before the levies hit, before they go to that next, their automobiles or bank accounts are seized. Task focuses on taking that taxpayer in and working the case until that case is fully resolved. But that also means bringing the taxpayer into compliance. When I was a revenue officer, which is the person that would go out and collect taxes, they'd say, go out, the focus was on collecting the debt. The focus was not on bringing the taxpayer into compliance. And I think this is a problem that we face here in Greece. People are already struggling, they're already in the red. So as we were discussing outside, it makes it a very difficult situation. The focus, from my perspective, and this is how I operated when I was collecting taxes, was to get the taxpayer compliant, educate the taxpayers so they understood what they needed to do to comply with the law, be kind, be understanding, and then turn around and focus on the debt later in partial installments, but don't go after the bulk of the debt and creating additional debt year after year after year, which is an endless cycle for taxpayers. Without tasks, many taxpayers would likely be left feeling that they have nowhere to turn, no one to resolve their problems, no backstop within the organization. A lot of this training that we're doing right now focuses on we call it empathy in action, but my husband advised me that empathy is not a good translated word in Greek. Empathikos, I guess, is the opposite. So let's say sympathy. Well, at least he told me that, right? Yep. Yeah. So we're teaching our employees to place themselves into the shoes of the taxpayer. You know, understand where they're coming from. You have taxpayers who are disabled. You have taxpayers who have, you know, whether they can't hear or they have mental disabilities and different issues that prevent them from fully complying. Try to get our employees to understand that we take our taxpayers as we get them. We don't get to pick our taxpayers. We don't get to pick the fact that they want to yell at us or that some of them are dreadfully mean on the phone. We still have to advocate for that taxpayer. And it's critical that our employees understand that. It's also important in that training that our employees understand what tools they have to resolve those issues with the taxpayers. We make sure that they have the tools. We recently, of course, put this training together and we're rolling it out this year. Training as far as tax law is also critical. Where the IRS future state is looking to move more services, they're reducing that footprint in the field. I would say that is, and Nina, absolutely wrong. We are doing the opposite. We are expanding our geographic locations so we have more people in the local offices in each state representing the taxpayers they serve. That's the best way to understand what kind of issues your taxpayers are facing. And I would go to say that somebody who is having a tax problem in Mykonos might be different than the person in Yetochoro, than the person in Kalyani, yep. Or the person in Loutraki, who just lost all his money to gambling losses. At the same time, we have, you know, moving forward, we're embracing technology. We're trying to move forward, but we realize that you cannot, it's not one size fits all. You have to look at the taxpayer and the situations and focus the tax administration policy on how you meet those taxpayer needs. I always have said this, politics are local, situations are unique. We must understand those differences to properly administer the laws. I went to the comparative tax analysis class in Harvard, and we had several people talk to us that were economists, macroeconomists, microeconomists, attorneys, tax legislation writers, and it dawned on me that they don't talk to the people that are out in the field administering the tax laws. And unless you've had that experience of representing taxpayers, of actually seeing what people suffer with, you can't properly administer those tax laws. So I just want to hit on one thing that here at the end, and I know we have a roundtable panel here. One of the most critical problems that I see in the IRS is their measures. The beauty of a taxpayer advocate service, our organization, is that we don't measure how quickly you take to close a case. We don't care how quick it is to close a case. What we want you to do is measure the time that you've contacted the taxpayer, that you've kept them informed. We want to make sure that you've advocated for the taxpayer. We're not looking at how long you were on the phone trying to resolve the problem. We're looking at, did you resolve all the issues? Did you make sure that their future issues were addressed? We care about our employees and employee satisfaction. We care about the training of our employees. You can't expect your employees to properly deal with taxpayers if you haven't provided them with the training and courses like we are offering as far as empathy. We care about transparency, compliance, we care about doing the right thing, we care about our citizens, and we care about our country. I guess you might say that Nina and I are trying to teach our employees a little filotimo. So we'll kind of...
Thank you for these initial remarks.
Thank you.
Very enlightening, I would say. If I have noted understanding and educating taxpayers, educating them and what the tax law provides, wise use of powers, effort to bring the taxpayer into compliance for his current and future obligations, and instead of focusing just on collecting taxes. I've noted it's not one size fits all, which is actually one of the two sub-principles of the principle of equality. Principle of equality is treating same cases equally and also treating differently situations that are different. And training and satisfaction of employees. You said that you have 800 employees in the...
1,800.
1,800 out of how many? The IRS overall?
86,000.
Okay.
You want to hear our budget?
Yep.
$216 million budget.
260. Okay, that's a reason to faint.
You know, another strategy that we're hitting on there is outreach. You know, we're going out and we're asking our employees to do more outreach to practitioner communities and be involved in their local communities, their congressional offices to help educate taxpayers.
Okay. We are in a phase of exploring how to create a taxpayer service. We have services that provide taxpayer service, but we don't have a, to say, unified taxpayer service. It's one of the suggestions we have received from technical assistance from the European Commission, the IMF, and we are exploring ways to do it. So I would like to ask Mr. Jean-Luc Barson-Morin, Head of Legal and the French Tax Administration, if you think that a centralized way of approaching the taxpayer service is the good thing, or if we also need to take into account, I think that Rena implied it in her speech, also local needs and local differences. I think we would all like to hear how the French tax administration has constructed this, the supply of services to the taxpayers.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for inviting French tax administration representative at this conference. I will try to be as consistent as possible with the agenda by telling that a way to create a safe environment for taxpayers is to provide legal safety. It's a good means to have better relationship with taxpayers, and one of our top priorities for the French tax administration, the FTA, is to maintain a non-adversarial relationship with taxpayers. This is a difficult goal. This can be a difficult goal in a country where the tax law is unstable and complex, where auditors are proactive to combat tax evasion. But This remains a strategic goal, and I will explain what we do in two topics. The first is to explain what we do in our network to provide legal certainty for taxpayers. And on the second point, I will mention what we do in matter of double taxation. So I will mention what we do in tax affair internationals. So the first point, the legal certainty for taxpayers. In France, taxpayers have long had the right to avail themselves of the FTA's interpretation of tax legislation. We have a duty to make our interpretations available to the public to ensure all taxpayers are treated on an equal footing. In September 2012, we launched a new website known as BOFIP for precisely this purpose. The site is a consolidated electronic archive of tax rulings of comments made by the French tax administration about the law, about new tax provisions. We also had publishable individual rulings, and we comment also case law. As well as publishing general information, we also issue advanced tax rulings on individual cases to give taxpayers legal certainty around their personal circumstances and plans. This service, which is open to all taxpayers, who is free, has even become something of a benchmark for other French government bodies. I add that these rulings are taken in accordance with the law. There has been a steady rise in the use of advanced rulings since 1987, which was the year where the lawmaker created this provision. So the lawmaker created a general ruling, and then after this first tool, created other special rulings to allow taxpayers to have a binding position from the tax administration in matter of depreciation, in matter of sponsorship, in matter of research tax credit. The procedural arrangements vary from case to case. For example, we issue explicit general rulings in some circumstances and implicit individual rulings in others, and we have different time limits within which to respond. We also set up ad hoc structures in all the territory. We appointed officers with specific responsibility for advanced rulings and with visibility for taxpayers. It's important for taxpayers to know that in every department they can find an officer dedicated to answer their questions. The number of rulings has increased steadily since the 2000, from around 10,000 in the middle of the 2000 to around 20,000 rulings on average in recent years. So the ruling aims to give legal certainty to a taxpayer on the subject, on a precise subject. We also embarked on a review of the enhanced relationship, the OECD term for its cooperative compliance initiative, in an effort to address information asymmetry between the tax authority and the taxpayer, and to encourage taxpayers to disclose their full tax liability upfront. We introduced recently a new service for businesses in which we look not just a particular plan, a particular project, but also all the annual profit. In return, we expect businesses to be open and transparent about their liability. This service, which provides absolute legal certainty and is currently being trialed with around 20 firms under a cooperative compliance pilot scheme, helps taxpayers cut their tax management costs. It also aims to curb companies' natural tendency towards aggressive tax planning and instead foster more compliant behavior. It is proving difficult to roll out this service more widely, unfortunately. However, the number of tax inspectors continues to decline, risk analysis tools gain, and we have to say that inspectors become ever more reluctant to make binding decisions. This is a cultural context, cultural difficulties, that we'll mention later. This experimental scheme is currently under review. Advanced rulings were originally used and dedicated for initial tax returns only, but some advisors asked the same service for taxpayers in matter of audit. So we created in 2005 this service for audit, but the truth obliged to say that very few companies ask this service. The same cultural reason I mentioned a few minutes ago. For the French tax administration, answering requests within the required time limit remains a constant challenge. We have 3 months to submit our response for general advance rulings, and there is no penalty for overshooting this limit. For special rulings, however, the tacit limit of 3 to 6 months places enormous pressure on our staff. As well as issuing advance rulings on domestic matters, our works encompass also advance pricing agreements, APAs, on cross-border taxation. Although we only receive a few dozen of these requests each year, we have to carry out a detailed examination with the business and the other competent authority, analyzing the transaction at issue and determining the appropriate transfer pricing methodology for each case. APAs have been well publicized in recent years with the OECD's BEPS project and the December 25 Council Directive on the exchange of information on individual rulings, and including, obviously, advanced tax rulings. We know the background of this work. First, tax attractivity policy, harmful practices from some member states in the European Union, a drive for greater transparency on cross-border taxation across all stakeholders. The OECD is spearheading work on this theme, and the European Commission and the DG Competition are taking welcome steps to stamp out exceptional tax treatment in some quarters. The aim of the December 2015 directive is to establish a system for member states to transfer key information about these advanced rulings. An automatic ruling exchange system will be introduced in 2018. A sliding scale system will apply to rulings prior to 1st January 2017, when the directive came into force, according to the date on which these rulings were issued. At the French tax authority, we have no problem with disclosing individual rulings from a legal perspective, because we issue rulings in accordance with the law. But it remains to be seen whether this move will affect or not the number of requests that we'll receive from businesses. we hear that some companies are reluctant to request, to ask questions about their situation, given the fact that the Commission initiates many inquiries and some companies are worried. If we take stock of this policy, we can say that this policy has produced mixed results. Because the service provides legal safety, it has enhanced our image as a transparent authority that seeks to build a non-adversarial relationship with taxpayers and prefers to take a preventive stance. Some taxpayers have embraced our advanced ruling service with open arms. I will mention non-profit organizations that account for 25% of the 20,000 rulings that we issue each year, a fact that stands testament to our approach to sensitive taxpayers. And we could see a fresh spike in ruling activity. The Commission follows through on its intention to publish a proposal for directive requiring intermediaries, taxpayers, or both to disclose tax avoidance schemes to the authorities, as is already the case in many countries, but not in France so far. On a more negative note, some taxpayers groups are still unwilling to use the services at their disposal. The research tax credit scheme is a case in point. More than 10,000 businesses complete an annual tax credit return, but the tax authority, which has introduced many kind of ruling for this scheme, which is very important for the French economy, issues an average of just 200, 300 rulings each year. Moreover, as I have already said, the Commission and the DG Competition launched investigation into tax arrangements, and after media revelation about the true nature of these deals, of these unlawful rulings, and as I mentioned, this creates a disfavorable background for rulings undoubtedly. While this quest for greater transparency is put bad practices in the spotlight, it's likely to have unintended harmful consequences, raising doubts and perhaps even suspicion on about the very principle of individual rulings. That's why we should speak about unlawful rulings in order not to discredit the principle of ruling. That is very necessary to have more quiet relationship with the taxpayers. I will mention now what we make in matter of in international matters. For staying on this ground, after mentioning what tax administration provide in matter of advanced legal safety, I'd like to move on to discuss about what the tax administration do to suppress situation of double taxation. After prevention, we describe what we make ex post, in fact. The last 10 years have seen a spike in demand for mutual agreement procedures under tax treaties in major OECD countries, from more than 2,000 MAP cases in 2006 to more than 500 in 2015. This development reflects a rise in double taxation disputes, fueled by an upsurge in transfer pricing, investigations, and audits. The situation in France, which has allegedly the third highest number of MAP cases in the world, is indicative of this trend. The FTA has taken stock of this situation and revamped its organization accordingly in an effort to better serve the needs of economic operators. A new department created created to deal specifically with transfer pricing and double taxation disputes has been up and running since September 2012. With a staff of 11 people, this department has two missions. The first is to investigate APAs and contribute to economic thinking in this area. And secondly, to examine MAP cases and other cross-border tax affairs. The department, inspired by similar arrangements put in place by France's economic partners, is intended to act as a one-stop shop for businesses on all MAP and APAs matters. Our aim on both MAP cases and APAs is to shorten processing times and steadily reduce the number of open cases, while remaining within the confines of tax treaty law and following our internal procedure. It's very important to formalize and to trust our decision, because as every institution, every administration, we are under scrutiny. By prioritizing the longest standing MAP cases, we stabilized the backlog at less than 600 MAP cases by the end of at the end of the previous year. Each year, the department handles around 100 MAP cases and receives roughly the same number of new requests. We are exploring to speed up the case handling process. We work with our partners to reach solutions. However, the pace of progress can differ from country to country, as some partners take longer to act than others. While we have cleared some of our backlog with more cooperative partners, some other authorities have failed to keep pace because they lack either the resources or they lack to move forward at the same speed and according to the same principle. We are also involved in international efforts to roll out arbitration as a means to settle MAP cases that cannot be solved in a bilateral dialogue. In October 2016, the European Commission published a proposal for a directive to introduce automatic arbitration procedure in case where no agreement can be reached in the initial MAP cases. The proposal, which builds on BEPS Action 14, has two aims: to increase arbitration take-up and expand its scope, and to offload a significant portion of cross-border dispute resolution work to third parties. The Maltese presidency hopes to finalize negotiation on the directive during this month, and maybe during this week or the next week. And another point to mention, France, as part of the OECD FTA MAP Forum, is also involved in the peer review process, in which peers, I mean competent authorities, and taxpayers assess how members are handling their MAP cases. The objective, we are involved in a process of name and shame. France's assessment under batch 2 of the scheme began in April this year. The OECD will publish a report outlining the findings. The peer review process will reveal which countries are making progress on double taxation dispute resolution, and it will show which members are falling behind on compliance with OECD principles. In conclusion, doing more to shield businesses from double taxation therefore requires action on two fronts. On the legal front, introducing compulsory arbitration. We are doing it with a directive. And the second front is the practical one, implementing peer review, putting more pressure on countries to cut their attachment to budget-driven policy. And in taking these steps, governments will be doing their bit to help resolve double taxation disputes under BEPS BEPS tax avoidance rules. Thank you.
Thank you for your very interesting remarks. You're right to say that one key element to a safe environment for taxpayers is legal certainty. And you have presented what the French tax administration does both at the national level with the advanced rulings and the international levels with putting forwards and investing in the APAs and also the compulsory arbitration. I have a question. The advanced rulings, and something maybe our audience would be interested in hearing, why do you call it advance? It comes before the audit, it's before someone undertakes an activity.
Exactly.
What is the concept of advance ruling?
The principle is that the taxpayer has to present its project before it implements. He has to give all information, all relevant information about his project to allow the tax administration to take the correct decision, to have all the key points and to take a correct decision in accordance with the law.
And he gets a tailored answer, I mean, to what he has. What
the
he
principle
has
is that the lawmaker recognizes that the law is unstable, complex, and the principle is to say, so you taxpayer, you don't understand anything to the law, that's normal, but we try to give you the response to your own situation, to your own project.
And what is the response to that? What is the deadline?
We have from 3 months to 6 months to reply. Some companies, large companies, would like we reply quickly, faster, but when issues are very complex, it's not reasonable, it's not possible to reply in less than 3 months.
And who is in charge of replying to these questions? Is it the local offices or services, or is it the headquarters? Is it reviewed by the headquarters before being?
95% of rulings are issued by the network, by local services.
Mm-hmm. So you trust that enough guidance has been given so that they give.
So we try to steer the network. We try to give directive to make sure that rulings that are issued in accordance with the law. That's very important, and that services take the same position on the same question. And this can be difficult because the law is complex, and the facts can be the same in a way, but not totally, and that these discrepancies between taxpayers make the decision process very hard to steer.
Okay, and still you said that despite that there are mixed feelings about, or mixed appreciation.
For cultural reasons, because companies are reluctant to ask questions because they feel that other services of the French tax administration will come at home.
Okay.
And but it's a legend. There is no information that give evidence that the tax administration send its auditors when it receives a request on a ruling. But yeah, there are cultural problems.
You have both approached the issue from different perspectives, Rena and you, Jean-Luc, but if there is a common element in both your presentation is that we need to move away from budget-driven policies. We need to look further into the rights of the taxpayer. I will give the floor to Jeroen Jeroen has been following our work in the DRU, in the Dispute Resolution Unit. And he is an expert of the Dutch tax administration in alternative ways of dispute resolution, right?
I don't call it alternative.
Okay, you call it the mainstream. Okay, you're right. And I would like to have your perspective on the issues of creating a safe environment for the taxpayers.
So, as Mr. Pitsidis said, I've been coming to Greece now for over 5 years within the framework of technical assistance to advise the Greek tax administration on how to establish and to implement a dispute resolution function. And so therefore first I must compliment the Greek tax administration on their remarkable progress in that field and for organizing this day, as we sit here together this day. And secondly, Ms. Olsen and Ms. Giri Nagis, if I pronounce it rightly, they have cut some grass before my feet, as they say. So today I found some genuine reasons why America should be put first. But anyway, I was asked to tell you something about the relationship as we see it in the Netherlands between trust, compliance, preventing disputes, and how to handle disputes. So therefore, I'll start with the state of play in the Netherlands. We have a comparatively high level of trust in government. Of course, we have problems. Of course, we have a lot of discussions, but in the end, there's a relatively high level of trust in government. And there's also a high level of compliance with fiscal obligations. So a high level of compliance for tax administration. So compared to the work that the Greek colleagues have set out for them, I think taxation in the Netherlands is easy. We have an easy job, and here it is far more difficult. Alas, trust and compliance are not self-evident. You have to do something to gain trust and to stay at a high compliant level. As we say, trust comes on foot, but it leaves on a horse. Or as a psychologist explained to me, within relationships between humans, it takes 17 positive experience to equalize 1 negative experience. So, and it's easy to create a negative experience with taxpayers. So,
I think all married people know that.
Do we have all night to discuss that, or it's self-evident also? Yeah. Well, the strategic goal of our Dutch tax administration is compliance, the voluntary complying to fiscal obligations, and our core values in our mission statements are credibility, carefulness of the rights of the taxpayers, and responsibility. So our supervision strategy is a mix between what Ms. Olsen presented. Everybody gets the attention he or she deserves. So compliant taxpayers, they get serviced, and non-compliant taxpayers, well, they get audited, to put it very shortly. So what do we do in general to maintain trust and compliance? Well, as I said, the rendering of services is very important. I will come to that in more detail later on. And we have a slogan, compliance by design. Make it easy for taxpayers to comply with the law and make it difficult for them not to comply. I'll give some examples of that too. And our slogan for the last 20 years has been, we cannot make it more fun to pay taxes, but we can make it easier to do so. So, what do we do? As I said, rendering of services, be transparent, be easily accessible. We have webcare on Twitter and Facebook. Of course, we have an internet page. We have tax call centers for incoming calls, but we also use them for outbound calls. Interaction, it could be digital interaction or it could be personal, through telephone contact or otherwise. So the slogan is interaction before transaction. Before reaching a decision, before you have to pay something, there should be communication on that possible decision. And as I said, we have compliance by design. We use pre-filled tax return, and the information that is in the pre-filled tax return we get from insurance companies, from banks, from employers, etc. is getting better every year. And we have super efficient communication before filing. Of course, there are examples about selling and buying of property, what do you call it, divorce situations, or after death. That some situations are difficult. Legislation is difficult, situation is difficult, it's sensitive. So we use communication in these situations if we can discern the group it concerns before the filing has to be done. So if you're in a certain situation, you will get a letter or a mail or whatever means is available saying, well, we see that you're in this situation, and we know that often mistakes are being made. So please put into respect these and these conditions, etc. So that will prevent some of the mistakes being made. In the Netherlands, we also have the concept of horizontal control or horizontal supervisions. We have a set of agreements and arrangements with both large taxpayers and with middle taxpayers through their fiscal advisors or their accountants. Framework, if you live up to that framework, we accept the tax returns that you send in. So we don't talk about individual tax returns, we talk about the framework which the tax returns are being made. And of course there are discussions, but in the end sometimes the fiscal intermediaries or accountants are even seen as a prolongment of the tax administration. So it's of course there's discussion, but in the end it helps us to do our job. Then a long-lasting instrument we have in the Netherlands is that there's agreement possible between the tax administration and the taxpayer in all phases of taxation. It could be, like in France, we call it preliminary consultation, but it's the same as you just mentioned, the advance ruling. Even before the facts take place, someone comes with a project, and often the end of the discussion is that we will accept the fiscal outcome of that project if some elements are changed of the project. It can be done during filing, it can be done during the appeals phase, whatever. Every phase it is possible to make an agreement. Of course, we give the taxpayers better information before filing and during filing. And last thing to prevent conflicts is that when we are auditing a tax return or a company, we have contact before during the primary phase of decision making. And whenever we see that a tax return is not correct or that someone does not maintain his administration as he should, we'll contact him before the consequences are put into place. But then again, of course, there will always be disputes and conflicts, even with the most well-drafted laws, even with the best communication and information for the taxpayers. There will always be conflicts because taxation is, again, in the end, is about money and who gets to pay how much money. So there will always be conflicts, and therefore we have a dispute resolution function, and for me it's the main function. Before someone files an appeal, and I mean an administrative appeal, we have an appeals check on the internet, whether it is useful for a taxpayer or not to file an appeal. Maybe he would like to file a complaint, which is different. Or maybe he would like to file a postponement of payment if that is necessary. For us, of course, as tax administration, we know exactly the difference between those things, but for taxpayers, they can be very mixed. So we have, if he decides to file an administrative appeal, and administrative appeal is mandatory before it is possible to make a judicial appeal, you can do the appeals check. Well, if you file an appeal, then we have a very low threshold procedure. You can file your appeal in any which way you want. Of course, we would like it to have it done digitally because it's easier for us to handle. But you can do it on any piece of paper you'd like and send it to us, and we'll check it in as an administrative appeal. There are no costs involved whatsoever. And this administrative procedure has three functions. Or the main three functions. The first function is the filter function. We do not wish every problem that the taxpayer has with our decisions to reach the courts, because the courts is time-consuming, it's a costly procedure, and most decisions can be righted at our tax level. And to give you an example, last year we counted, it depends on your definition, we counted over 640,000 administrative appeals, and there were only 8,000 judicial appeals filed last year. So that's a huge effect of the filter function. The second function is building trust. If the taxpayers see that the tax administration is looking at the complaints, the appeals by the taxpayer independently and looking at it with the right reasons, then a taxpayer will sooner accept that the tax administration is performing its job in a right way, that it regards the rights of the taxpayer. And last function is what we call the learning or the mirror function. Of course, tax administration is hard work. You make millions of decisions every year. And of course, not all decisions are completely right at the first time. We would like to be it like that, but of course it's not reality. And by all the appeals and complaints that come in, we say we look in the mirror. We see our own mistakes, and we try to learn from that mistakes. Not always easy, not always successful, but we try. So when there is an administrative appeal, we use a lot of personal contact with the taxpayer. We call it the informal approach. We want our employees to contact the taxpayer soon after the administrative appeal has been received. We will ask for reasons, and that is a broad definition. Of course, there are always matters of fact and law, but there are more often emotional reasons from all kinds of reasons. If you investigate the company of something or someone's administration for an entrepreneur, that's his life. So if you find a mistake in that administration, he will take it personally. So there's a lot of emotion involved, and we often also have taxpayers who do not like authority, who defy authority. And whatever they get from the government, be it from the tax service or another part of administration, they tend to react to it. They do not accept authority. And sometimes it even goes back to the war, that attitude. So we ask for reasons why people file their appeals. And we've been doing it now for 7 years, this informal approach, and the difference is that we're no longer explaining why we've come to a decision, but we're listening to the taxpayer, what their problems are. And we find that, and that's based upon the notion that acceptance of a decision does not entirely depend on the content of the decision, but also depends on the procedure. Has the taxpayer been involved in his own procedure? Does he had the opportunity to say what he wanted to say? Does he feel he has been heard by the tax administration? And we find that this informal approach, listening instead of explaining, leads to better results. Better in terms of acceptance of the decisions by the taxpayer. in the end also better in the content, but also cheaper for us as a tax administration, because you get to solve problems earlier than you would have done if you would have kept the procedure purely formal. Of course, important and also laid down in our law is that the appeal is to be handled by a different official than the one who made the primary decision. And a hearing is a right for the taxpayer. He can always ask for a hearing, but a hearing is a formal session, a formal thing. So it often does not take place because we always have to ask the taxpayer, do you want a hearing? But usually the taxpayer no longer needs a hearing because he feels he has been heard already. At least that is what we hope. But this is the reason that out of, over 600,000 administrative appeals, as we count them now, there were less than 1,000 hearings last year held, formal hearings held. Well, okay. So, the decision on the administrative appeal has to be done in writing. And of course, you can lodge a judicial appeal against the decision at the court of first instance. And as in almost all systems, there's possibility of a higher court and at a high court. To mention, we also have the possibility of mediation. It's not so often used anymore. You can have mediation at administrative level. And so also mediation during or next to the judicial level. We had good results with mediation, but because we have in fact incorporated the mediation skills as we use them in our informal approach, the need for mediations has diminished. And at the other end of the spectrum, I could call Project Escala. We have a research project being done, and we have now formed a team on basis of that research project, which is about handling very highly escalated conflict files. We have a couple of hundred of these kinds of files, which usually last for 10, 12 years. If you would have a fully paper file, because everything is digital, of course, but if it will be a file of more than 2 meters thick. There are terrible cases, and we have done research on what is the origin of that kind of cases. Why do we see ourselves drawn into these cases? That it's conflict upon conflict upon conflict, and how can we de-escalate these conflicts? So at the upper end of the conflict ladder, as we call it, we're also trying to de-escalate. So, conclusions. Taxation in the Netherlands is built upon the notions of trust and compliance. As I explained, we use the term compliance by design. We actively try to prevent disputes and conflicts in all stages of taxation. The administrative appeals procedure has a low threshold and is easy for the taxpayer. The informal approach leads to better results than the traditional handling of appeals. And of course, there are possibilities of judicial appeals and of mediation. That's what I would like to say. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation. I've noted the 2 proverbs you use. We cannot make it more fun, but we can make it easier. And the other one about the foot and the horse, that, you know, trust comes on foot but lives on a horse, which means that indeed any deficiency in trust is very difficult to remedy. And I have to say that, at least my personal view is that we suffer a very, very big loss of trust between the taxpayers and the tax administration, the state as a whole, I think. And this is maybe one of the reasons why we have not so far achieved the levels of compliance of other countries. I have a question. How many writs of recourse do you have in this, in the dispute resolution before, not judicial recourse, the written complaints? Yeah. How many do you have yearly, on a yearly basis?
How many administrative appeals?
Yep, administrative appeals, yes.
Well, as I said, we counted over 600,000 now. But then you have to acknowledge that there are differences. We, until now, it's very recent, we count also this simple change of a tax returns. We count it, and we have to handle it as an administrative appeal. But we sent a letter to Parliament just 2 weeks ago, stating that, and it is within the boundaries of law, that we will no longer be treating those simple changes as an administrative appeal. But if you would look at the traditional correction on a tax return, the traditional dispute between taxpayer and tax administration, we have about 70,000 of them each year.
70,000?
Yeah.
What is the population of the Netherlands?
We have about 70 million inhabitants.
Okay, all right. I don't know if, yes.
I can give a figure for France, if you want.
Yes.
Comparison. In France, there are 36 million taxpayers. There are 36 million taxpayers. We receive 3 million contentious claims, and we have
3 million. 3 million.
3 millions.
Okay.
Contentious claims, and we have 20,000 claims before the judge. How can we explain the difference? In fact, there are many, many mistakes made by the taxpayers when they file their return. And when they receive the amount of tax to pay, they wake up and they file a complaint, but in fact the mistake can be corrected very quickly. Okay. And when a key point is to reply very quickly. Our services have to reply within a 1 month period to each complaint made by individuals.
Do you also count into that the audits? I mean, the assessment.
Yeah.
So in this 3 million, you also have the part that is a video redressement, so an audit.
Audits, yeah.
Okay.
Included.
Okay.
I was just going to talk about compliance rates. A study that the National Taxpayer Advocate's Office did on individuals who filed earned income tax credit. There was a very high, either they weren't claiming it, they were claiming too much. And a strategy of education and sending out a different notice, not your standard notice, but prior to their filing the returns, and this is still going on, sending out letters and saying, last year we saw that you filed this return incorrectly. Here are the things that we identified. So it's not a threat. We're just saying this is what we saw that we think is wrong. You might want to look at it and correct it again. And we're waiting for the results of those and how the tax bureau will react. But previous studies from the operating divisions in the IRS have shown that practitioners have a tendency to respond better to EITC type issues. I would say as far as the trust issue, and our problem-solving days is an opportunity, perhaps in this country, to partner with the practitioner community in local offices and go out with representatives, partner with the individuals who are responsible for going out and doing the audits and the collecting, and inviting the members of the Ombudsman's office to go out and have a neutral day where you're participating and you advertise for taxpayers to come in, and we're going to help you with this specific issue. You've got everybody at the table. working together, trying to resolve the issue in a non-confrontational enforcement type way would go a long way in helping that trust factor.
Okay, I think this is part of what we consider as very important from our side, to be open to the taxpayers, to the practitioners, and as you say, we try to meet regularly with all the representatives in the market, accountants, lawyers, but also representatives of large business, medium-sized businesses, small businesses. Indeed, this is part of creating trust, being open to discussion, open to the necessary dialogue that will get you the feedback that you need to correct the things that need to be corrected. I don't know if you would care for another round of remarks, or maybe we could give the floor for some questions. You're certainly heard, but I don't know if we hear you from up here. But
I would like to know if taxes can be forcibly collected during the administrative appeal.
In which country you?
Well, in the Netherlands, they cannot be forcibly collected as a main rule. Because you get postponement of payment if you file an administrative appeal, but there can be circumstances, of course, when we think there is a situation of tax fraud or something like that we can make the arrangements.
And who bears the burden of proof?
Oh, sorry, what do you mean with the burden of truth in this case?
Proof.
Oh, what proof is? That's not the problem. But what do you exactly mean with the burden of proof
So,
in this situation?
In this specific situation, how do you differentiate a case in which you do not start with forcible collection and from cases in which you do start because you think there is fraud?
Okay. Well, there's always, of course, administrative appeal is not the first contract between us and the taxpayer. It will usually be in a situation after an audit, and so we already had a lot of experience and talks with this taxpayer or his advisors or whatever. So we usually have a pretty good grasp of what is going on.
And in France, taxes are not collected during the first step of judicial proceeding. But if the decision of a first judge is not favorable to the taxpayer, he has to pay the amount of tax.
And I'm going to defer to Nina Olson.
I was actually going to talk about another appellate procedure, but in the independent appeals function, there would be no collection activity unless there was jeopardy, that the collection of tax might be at risk, the person leaving the country, moving assets, and the burden of proof is on the IRS to prove jeopardy. And that's actually one of the statutory protections in the Internal Revenue Code. I was going to talk about a different kind of appeal, if I may, which is it's an administrative appeal, and I referenced it in my remarks earlier, for collection actions. So much of the time we focus on the actual assessment of tax and the administrative appeals after an audit. But for many taxpayers, at least in the United States, it's how are you going to collect it that is the real issue. And sometimes they're in audits because they can't pay the tax and they're disputing it because they just can't pay it, which goes to your point about being able to determine the reasons why you've done this appeal at the very beginning, because then you can address the issue better. And what Congress did several years ago in 1998 was enact an independent appeal when the IRS does a right to an independent appeal when the IRS takes its first levy action on a debt or files its first federal notice of lien, like gives a public notice that the taxpayer has a debt. And so the taxpayer is able to have an individual independent appeal. And the statute says that that appeals officer has to make sure that all administrative steps and legal things have been complied with. And many of these things, that's where you find that maybe the statute of limitations has run and you have no authority to take an action. You shouldn't have assessed the tax. There might be procedural errors there. So that's one thing that you do in that hearing. Second thing is the taxpayer can raise all collection alternatives, can say, I need to pay on time, over time. I am so poor, I'll never be able to pay this in the life of the time that we have for this. Or a number of other things, again, bringing in the protections that exist in the Internal Revenue Code. And then lastly, the appeals officer, again, this is that phrase, you look at the government's legitimate interest in collecting the tax and balance that with the taxpayer's interest that it be no more intrusive than necessary what we're doing. And then they have to give a written determination as to all of those elements and what is the right result in this case. And if and that's a written determination. If the taxpayer doesn't like that, then they can go to the United States Tax Court and appeal the collection findings. And there, the tax court is held to abuse of discretion, which means it has to be that the appeals officer, it's a very high standard, they really had to be arbitrary and capricious in their action. But for the first time since 1998, we now in the United States have case law of looking at the government's actions in how it's collecting the tax, not whether you got the right legal answer for whether the taxpayer owes the tax or not, but did you collect the tax, looking at all of these elements. And it's changed, it's brought out some very interesting things about those procedures. And I just put that out there because it was, it's a whole new procedure for the United States. I mean, it's been around since '98, but the case law is really beginning to develop about what are proper actions and the things that you should be considering when you go about collecting a tax that is legally due and owing.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Just a question for the Dutch participant. And in France, indeed, when we go to court, we don't have to pay, but at the first level. But if we lose, then we have to pay. But we have to give guarantee. And what are the guarantees required in Holland? Because I mean, this is a part of the problem. You have an argument with the tax authority, you disagree, and you want to go to court. But I mean, then the tax authorities, which is normal, says, well, I mean, you must guarantee because I must have my own guarantees and so on and so on. So it can be a mortgage, it can be a bank guarantee, it can be blah, 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 or you can pay, and then you will be reimbursed plus interest, because I mean, that's also the good part. Yes, and which is a good, I mean, interest rate is not too bad compared to what you get from your bank. Well, I mean, that's another span. But, I mean, in Holland, what is the approach? You go to court, do you have to give guarantee?
No, usually not. You can just go to court and ask for postponement of payment. And it's very seldom that we do not grant the postponement of payment, that we will ask for guarantees. It's very seldom. Yeah.
We did not reply to what happens in Greece. Maybe you know already. 50% is due. 50% is due. If 50% is paid, then we do not pursue the rest, unless there is a stay of execution for the whole amount. This is how it was. There was much more leniency in the past, but after the country entered into a program, things got more rigid in this respect.
I'm curious as to the representation of taxpayers by practitioner community, the percentage in the country.
You mean?
How many taxpayers are represented by a practitioner, a certified public accountant? When they come into the audit, they have somebody representing them.
They're allowed to.
But what percentage would you say do?
I think it depends from the taxpayer and the
type of taxpayer.
the tax.
Business,
Yes,
yeah.
businesses normally have at least their accountants, and you know, depending on the size, they will also have lawyers. They're entitled to have anyone they desire with them in order to assist them. And of course, the filing of the writ of recourse, they're allowed either to file directly or file, be represented by a lawyer. Then again, a writ of recourse, judicial appeal, it's always by a lawyer. I don't think this is what we lack. Actually, I think there is enough. We have a good level of safeguarding as regards the representation of taxpayers.
I would have to say I'm very impressed. I heard that the French tax administration has a staff of 11 people doing the map process. And actually, France is, I think, the second in Europe in map cases. So I think we have to learn a thing or two from efficiency-wise from the French tax administration. It's actually very impressive. I think you had more than 200 cases last year, right?
At the end of 2016, we had around 600 map cases. And with a proportion of 40% of individuals and 60% of companies, from companies.
So people from the agency, the sky is the limit. That's what I should deduct from all that.
Actually, as I said before, we are trying to achieve even one. So
it's not a matter of employees, though. It's very right to point it out.
But that's a matter of employees, in fact, because, as I said, there is currently an exercise of benchmark made by OECD in the framework of FTA Map Forum, and we hope we'll have information about the level of employees for all administration, and we'll be able to make comparison about the number of map cases per employee. And I guess when we discuss with our colleagues, we realize that in France we are certainly understaffed for the treatment of map cases. But don't repeat, please.
I think we're all understaffed.
Yeah, thank you.
No one would say otherwise.
Yes.
We have too many people. No.
If I can intervene on that, the number of employees you need in your competent authority function can depend on a lot of things. And one of the things, for example, that I heard is, do you have a lot of transfer pricing cases, or do you have a lot of cases for individuals? Because it takes a different time and a different, yeah.
Different skills also.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So, it's also how many map cases do you receive every year? Because if you only receive a few number of cases every year, then you should not need to create a whole office of people dealing with these cases. Of course, if you have like hundreds of cases, then you would need by itself an office to deal with all these cases. So there is also in this aspect not a one size fits all, because it depends really on your specific situation, on how many people do you need, what skills do these people need to have, and how are you best organized to deal with the disputes that you have in your portfolio.
Any other questions while we have the luxury of comparative analysis and learning about experiences from other tax administrations from the audience?
Okay. Thank you.
One last question, probably, looking at the time. I heard the tax administration, the Dutch tax administration, possibly the French and the US also, have some experience with using mediation for the resolution of disputes with taxpayers in a more collaborative, cooperative way instead of disputes, conflict. I would like to hear your views, please.
When we talk about appeals and different programs, I mean, you look at the Taxpayer Advocate Service is unique in that we represent taxpayers. We are the voice for the taxpayers. So I see that an informal mediation, advocacy type role, that's exactly what we serve within the Taxpayer Advocate Service. Taxpayers are still afforded different rights and appeals and so forth through different processes within the IRS.
You know, I think in the United States that the actual appeals function, which does do some mediation, the challenge for that is that the taxpayer, one of the major concerns is who is the mediator. And there is a lot of underusage of mediation because of the selection process for the mediator. There's a lot of distrust about that. I think that appeals would say that where it's used, it's very successful. But when you look at the opportunities that have gone out the door not using it, for the practitioners that I've spoken with and the practitioner groups that have written on this, there seems to be a lot of concern about not being able to have an independent mediator, et cetera. So I think that the U.S. has a lot of work and a lot of things to learn there.
And no longer in a face-to-face environment. You know.
Right.
In the Netherlands, we also have experience with mediation. And in the mediation community, of course, independency is a big issue. But we have analyzed results from independent mediators in the sense that they're not working for the Dutch tax administration, and we also have our own mediators, just tax servants who are certified mediators. And for example, a mediator from the western part of the Netherlands will not be used for cases concerning someone from the western parts, but will be used for cases in another region. And we actually find that the results from mediations by our own mediators are better than those by fully independent mediators. We think that it has to do with the knowledge level of those mediators because they're more experienced in taxation and have a better grasp of fiscal conflicts. But yeah, I just wanted to mention this experience. But of course, independency is very important, of course. Yeah.
France, we have what we call a conciliator. This is the number one of the local service. This is the number one. And he has to have a second look at and a new and independent point of view of a problem raised by the taxpayer. And what we say, and he knows that he has to give up an adjustment that is not funded, and which is important, is to inform the first service that decided to make the taxpayer pay, is to explain why he decided to give up. Either he received the new facts from the taxpayer, or if he thought that the service was wrong when he decided to tax the taxpayer. You will say that's not very fair because the conciliator is embedded is not totally independent from the tax administration. But we have an indicator that tells us that the system functions correctly. As I said a few minutes, there is a very big difference between the number of first claims and the number of cases examined by the judge. Our policy is to go to the judge for cases that we think well-funded. And another indicator is that we get 70 to 80% of favorable decision from the judge.
If I would make a remark to that, that last issue is, I think that independently from the organizational structure, the key element in success of such a procedure is the independence of approach vis-à-vis the service that has initially issued an assessment or has treated the taxpayer's case. Then, you know, depending on the size of the country, the administration, there can be more solutions, more variants of solutions. I think from our side, we have sent for the last 3 years, 4 years now, practically, we have a system of a dispute resolution unit that has progressively shown that it can have this independence of approach, and we are willing to invest, to further invest on that, and also invest with its cooperation with the other services of the agency in order to have a more coordinated result. I would like to thank you all for your very, very interesting comments and remarks. I would like to thank everyone for the questions.